Last week, I dropped a video talking about every team's most overrated player that you guys gave to me on my community tab. And today, we're going to be doing the opposite of that. We're going to be talking about every team's most underrated player that you guys gave to me on my community tab as well. And if I disagree with what you came up with, I'll say who I think is that team's most underrated player. And if you want to have a chance to be featured in these videos, make sure you are subscribed. There's a lot of you guys that are not subscribed right now, so make sure you are subscribed, and then you'll get alerted of the community tab to be featured in the next one of these. Let's get into it. So we're going to start off with the Philadelphia 76ers, and LP says that for the 76ers, it's Guerschon Yabusele. He has been really reliable and shockingly a good offensive talent this season. And for the first one here, I'm going to agree with LP. I think Guerschon has been the most underrated Sixer this season because some of the top guys like Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey have had their ups and downs this year. I think Jared McCain is getting a ton of love, but out of all the secondary guys they signed in the offseason, out of Kelly Oubre, Caleb Martin, Eric Gordon, Andre Drummond, I think Guerschon Yabusele has been the best one out of that group. He hasn't played a professional basketball game in the NBA since 2019 before this season, but everybody was watching him play for Team France in last summer's Olympics. And this year, through 24 games, he's actually started 10 of them for Philadelphia, and he's averaging 9 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists a night, shooting 47% from the field and 37% from three. Still an abysmal free throw shooter, but I think Guerschon Yabusele has been a positive player this year for the 76ers. I think he deserves more love and may actually get a nice contract next year. Miguel says here for the Portland Trailblazers, it's Toumani Camara. He's a very good defensive player. And I think going into market size is going to help a player be more underrated than not. And I do think Toumani Camara is one of the more underrated players in the NBA. So I agree with Miguel here. I think going into this year, when you talked about underrated defenders, people would bring up Tari Eason, Dyson Daniels, and they are deservingly getting a ton of love this year. But I think Toumani Camara is up there as well. I think he's a beast on that end of the floor. And it's really cool to see somebody that was drafted out of Dayton with the 52nd pick in the 2023 draft. He was in that deal that sent DeAndre Ayton to Portland, and he has been arguably the most exciting asset from the Damian Lillard turnover because I think he's been more productive than what Malcolm Brogdon was for them. Obviously, Brogdon ended up getting them Denny Avdia, but more productive than DeAndre Ayton or Robert Williams as well, because Camara, who is still just 24 years old, is averaging 9 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.4 steals a night, and has shot 42% from the field and 37% from three this season. And the Trailblazers are a lot better of a team when he's on the floor. Obviously, he's going to be underrated. Like, it's a small market and a bad team like Portland, so I think Camara is going to be inevitably underrated. But I'm really excited to see the two-man defensive duo of him and Donovan Clingan, hopefully for a while in Portland. Forzan Poli says here for the Milwaukee Bucks, it's AJ Green, aka Derry Bird. Such an underrated player coming off the bench, incredible three-point shot and volume, and not that bad of a defender. I actually got a ton of Andre Jackson love for this, but I do agree with Forzan that AJ Green is the most underrated Buck, but I think it's more so his defense. I think we all know how good of a shooter AJ Green is. This year, he's shooting 47% from three on around 5 attempts a night. He's not too aggressive with this three-point shot, which I think I would like to see him be a little bit more aggressive, but that means he's not taking bad shots. He's not rushing it, not taking super contested threes or ones that are early in the shot clock unless he's wide open. And this is an undrafted diamond in the rough for Milwaukee and one of their best development projects over the last few years. Like, they failed a ton of guys in the past, most notably Marjon Beauchamp, but AJ Green at 25 years old, I think is one of the more underrated defenders in the NBA. If you watch him in that NBA Cup game, he's flying around on that end of the floor. He can hold his own against some quicker and shiftier guards that he's going up against, and he's going to be a very impactful and important player for the Milwaukee Bucks during April, May, and June when they're playing 7-game playoff series. We're going to go over to Chicago now, and Sub says for the Bulls, it's Ayo Dosunmu. He's currently averaging 13 points per game on 51% shooting from the field off the bench. Also, he's one of the league's most underrated perimeter defenders. Not bad for a 38th pick in relatively a weak draft class. He should be a top candidate for 6th man of the year. And Ayo Dosunmu got off to an abysmal start this year. In his first 8 games of the 2025 season, he averaged 9.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists a night, but he did shoot 38% from the field and just 17% from three on 5 attempts a night. But over his last 19 games, he's been averaging 14 points, 5 assists, shooting 54% from the field and 40% from three. So I think at that point, when he started turning his season around, that was probably when he was most underrated. I don't know if he's the most underrated Bull because I think we know how good Ayo is because he broke out last year with Kobe White. I would maybe go Julian Phillips as the most underrated Bull, but Bulls fans, you can let me know down below, or maybe Jalen Smith. We'll go over to Cleveland and we're going to talk about Phoenix's pick here, and that is going to be Isaac Okoro. People sleep because he was a high draft pick and expect a star role, but he is still really young and one of the best smaller defenders in the league, along with shooting the lights out from 3 this season. It is funny, smaller defenders in the league, and Isaac Okoro is 6'5". He's also known for being the last Woj bomb before Woj retired from ESPN, but I think Okoro has turned into a nice 3-and-D role in this league. Like Phoenix said, he hasn't really lived up to that number 5 overall pick back in the 2020 draft expectations, but that's fine. If you know you're not going to be one of these top guys, these top scoring options, pivot into a role that can allow you to play in the NBA for a long time, and you can make a lot of money doing so. And I think we've seen that from like Jalen Suggs in the past, and also Isaac Okoro. He's not going to be someone that's going to average 15 points per game. That's not his strong suit, but he could be a plus 3-point shooter. He is shooting 49% from 3 this season on around 3 attempts a game, and I think it's kind of similar to AJ Green. Like, he's not taking the worst shots in the world. I'd like for him to be a little bit more aggressive, but I still think Isaac Okoro is a tremendous defender. He did just recently get hurt, so hopefully that is not going to cost him too much of his 5th year in the NBA. I don't know, though. I would maybe still just go Jared Allen as somehow still the most underrated Cav. For the Celtics, Mason says it's Luke Kornet. He provides solid defense and rim protection given his size, and when him and Porzingis are on the floor, the paint is essentially locked down. He's also sneaky athletic because I've seen Pritchard throw him some nice lobs, so Luke is also a sneaky lob threat as well. And yeah, I think Luke Kornet is good, and when you're talking about someone that's like the 9th or 10th man on a team, I think you could say he's somewhat underrated. Kornet this year is averaging 5 points, 5 rebounds, and about assists and a half off the bench for the Celtics. He's even started 3 games this year, around 17 minutes a night, which is a career high, and he's also shooting 64% from the field. And I actually think Luke Kornet is a solid defender. He does this funny thing where no matter how far he is from somebody shooting the ball, he's going to jump in the air. Would I go the most underrated Celtic? I don't know. I think I might actually go to Sam Hauser, not because of Sam Hauser's overall play, but more so Sam Hauser's defense, because I also think Sam Hauser is one of the more underrated defenders in the NBA. Casey says for the Clippers, it's Chris Dunn. He's an amazing defender who can defend against multiple positions. He's also a decent 3-point shooter this year and does a lot of things well that don't show up in the stat sheet. Yeah, I'll agree with Casey here. I think Chris Dunn has actually been one of the more underrated guards in the NBA over the last couple of years. I really like the Clippers picking him up in the offseason, and he's averaging around 7 points, 3.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists this year, shooting 45% from the field and 32% from 3. So he's actually been a good 3-point shooter over the last 2 years, but on a much smaller volume. He was taking about a 3.5 per game over the last 2 years in Utah. This year, he's taking about 3 threes per game, and the 3-point efficiency has dropped a little bit. But Chris Dunn, like Casey said, is still one of the best defenders in the NBA at the guard position, and I think that could make him underrated. Clippers fans, you can let me know, do you think maybe somebody like Derrick Jones Jr. could also be nominated here? Because I could agree with that as well. Other Grizz for the Grizzlies says, I gotta go with Jay Huff. Really impressive as a backup guy, shooting almost 41% from 3 at 7'1". A great pickup. And Other Grizz is not wrong. He was a great pickup for what it costed Memphis this year. Throughout 27 games, he's averaging 9 points, shooting 51% from the field and 41% from 3. He basically signed a 2-way contract with the Memphis Grizzlies back in July. That got converted to a regular contract in October, right when the season started. He's currently dealing with an ankle injury, but he has been a nice offensive big man off the bench. I actually don't think he's the most underrated Grizzly, though, because I do think it's one of their best players, somebody that should be in talks for an All-NBA team this year, and definitely to make an All-Star team. I think he's been better than John Moran, and that is Jaren Jackson Jr., who's averaging 22 points, 6 rebounds, shooting 36% from 3, and is still one of the best overall defenders in the NBA. And I feel like Triple J deserves some more love this year. Drew Dow says for the Atlanta Hawks, it's gotta be Jalen Johnson. And I think last year, a lot of people started to figure out who Jalen Johnson was. He broke out fully last year. And now this year, I think he's capitalizing on that momentum that he had in the 2024 season, now that they don't have DeJounte Murray anymore, and he stepped up as that number 2 scoring option. This year, throughout 25 games, he's averaging just under 20 points per game. He is a monster rebounder. I think one of the more underrated rebounders in the NBA, both on the offensive side and the defensive side. He can use his athleticism to crash the glass and actually get rebounds over taller and stronger defenders. He's shooting around 50% from the field, 33% from 3, and 74% from the line. I would like for his 3-point shot to just be a little bit better over the course of the year, but I think Jalen Johnson is a great defender. He's averaging 1.4 steals and 1.1 blocks this year. Somebody at 6'9", he's got a good wingspan and is super athletic. I would go with him or even the number 1 overall pick, Zachary Reese-Shea, as the Hawks' most underrated player, but Reese-Shea has kind of struggled this year offensively offensively with his shot, but I think it's more so his defense, because I think that's been a nice addition to this year's Hawks team. You can maybe even go with Trae Young as well, because maybe he deserves some more love for carrying this Hawks offense at times for a team that didn't have the highest expectations this year, but it's looking like they could definitely be a playoff team in the East. Mr. Teagan says for the Miami Heat, it's Hayward Highsmith. He's been great as a starter so far this year on decent volume. He's been great as a defensive wing, and his offense has been pretty good, even though he doesn't take too many shots. And since Hayward Highsmith got incorporated into the starting lineup throughout 16 games, the Miami Heat are 10-6. He's averaging around 7 points, 3 rebounds, over assist and steal a night, around a block a night as well, and is shooting 43% from the field and 43% from 3. And like this guy said, he doesn't take too many shots, and I agree, but I also just agree with his take as a whole. I think Hayward Highsmith is one of the more underrated players in the Southeast Division and in the Eastern Conference. He's a great 3-and-D wing for this Miami Heat offense, and they've looked so much better as a team overall since they inserted him into the starting lineup, which is also just another dope find for the Miami Heat. Like, just an undrafted player from Wheeling University. Pat Riley did it again, and I think he's definitely the most underrated Heat, because I think Tyler Hero is now starting to get his flowers. This next one comes about the Charlotte Hornets, and this person says Josh Green has been a solid scorer and 3-point shooter for the Hornets, especially while everybody was hurt. And I think Josh Green definitely deserves some more credit as a role player. He struggled at times last year for the Dallas Mavericks after having a breakout 2023 season. He pretty much was sent to Charlotte so Dallas could get Klay Thompson this offseason. I wonder if they would have liked to have that back, or maybe they're still fine with Klay Thompson throughout the course of this season. Mavericks fans, you can let me know in the comments. But so far this year, Josh Green is averaging around 7.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, 43% from the field, and 43% from 3. I still think it provides you positive energy and defense on that end of the floor. And I think now playing in Charlotte can help you be a little bit more underrated, since they are a smaller market team. And unfortunately, they've been hammered with injuries this year, and they haven't been a good team record-wise in the East. But I actually think Musa Diabaté is also one of the more underrated big men in the NBA. This guy is a monster rebounder, and there's a chance he could be the best big man on this Hornets roster. And that may be a hot take. For the Jazz, Joe Oliver says John Collins is having a 50-40-90 season. Yeah, I'm finally calling John Collins underrated at this point. Obviously, the contract could make him somewhat overrated. We know what he is at this point, and he's had somewhat of a disappointing career after that 2019 and 2020 seasons where he really broke out offensively, and the numbers started dipping down every single year until this year for Utah. Definitely one of the better years of his career, and like Joe said, the efficiency is off the charts. He's shooting 53% from the field on around 12 shots a night, 43% from 3 on around 3 shots a night, and 89% from the free throw line on around 4 attempts a night. He's averaging 18 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and about a steal and a half a night. Also, John Collins has a player option next year for $26 million. And going into this year, everybody would have expected him to pick that option up. But now it's looking like Collins could decline that option and get a decent amount of money long term, because he's a big man that could space the floor. I think you could really optimize his offensive game with playing him sometimes as a center, and you could stagger those minutes there. And I'm really intrigued to see where John Collins is after this year's trade deadline. Breezy says here for the Sacramento Kings, it's Keon Ellis. He's a great defender. He just had a 4-block, 2-steal game. He gives great effort and is a hustle machine and shooting over 40% from 3. I think Keon Ellis was way more underrated last year. Now we're starting to figure out who Keon Ellis is. We all know that he's a great perimeter defender in this league. This year, throughout 25 games, 6.5 points, over 2 rebounds, about assists a night, 46% from the field, 40% from 3, 84% from the line. And he is one of the better defenders in the NBA, like I said. I wonder if he is the most underrated King. I actually gravitate a little bit towards De'Aaron Fox, because he is arguably the best Sacramento King, and I think he just deserves some more love nationally, because Fox is putting up 26 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists this season. Maybe Sacramento Kings fans would like a little bit more out of Fox at times if he's their true number one. There's the contract situation looming over everybody in Sacramento right now. Will he re-sign with them? But I just feel like on a national level, De'Aaron Fox is underrated for the production he puts out in Sacramento every single night. Tristan says for the Knicks, it's got to be Precious Achiuwa, Miles McBride, and Josh Hart get their underrated shouts a lot. OG is also underrated because stats don't reflect him, but Precious was looked at as a salary piece in the OG trade, and now is the 8th man in the rotation playing power forward and center and doing well too. And I could agree with Tristan here, because the Knicks are a weird team when you're talking about their most overrated and underrated player, because Bridges, Hart, Anunoby, Cat, and Brunson, they rely so much on that 5-man lineup. So when you're going to the bench units, I think Miles McBride was underrated last year, but now he's not really underrated anymore. A lot of people know about him, but I think what Precious Achiuwa has given this team since he's come back from injury, I think could be a breath of fresh air for this Knicks and their second unit defense. overall as a team this year, the Knicks have struggled a lot defensively, and I think Precious gives them some really good rim protection coming off the bench. He's played around 18 minutes a night in the 5 games since returning from that injury he suffered in the preseason. He's averaging around a steal and block a night, and I think just as a whole is a good switchable big man for this Knicks team. So I would either go with him, but maybe there's a bigger guy you can go with, like OG Anunoby. I think could deserve some more love, but he's getting paid a ton of money now. So maybe Josh Hart, because this guy is still one of the best role players, if not the best role player in the NBA. Dame Dollar says for the LA Lakers, it's Rui Hachimura. He's our 3rd best player, but no one talks about him. He's one of the most efficient 3-point shooters, and he's very good in the paint, and he's a good defender, and he plays way better in the playoffs. Yeah, after the season started, I feel like Rui Hachimura became very overrated, but I think as an offensive piece for this Lakers team, sure, Rui could be underrated. When I was talking about like the Blazers and the Hornets, a lot of those players could be considered underrated because of their market size, and it feels like there's no LA Laker that could be considered underrated because everybody talks about the Lakers the most. But this year, Hachimura is shooting 48% from the field, 44% from 3, averaging around 12 points, 5.5 rebounds, and a steal a night. I would like for Rui just to be a little bit better defensively because I still think the potential is there, but I think as a whole, he could be considered as one of the more underrated Lakers. But I think you can also give some love to what Cam Reddish does on the defensive end of the floor. Dylan says for the Orlando Magic, it is Mo Wagner. He's one of the most underrated players in the league. I don't know if it's just playing with his brother makes him better or he just strives on Orlando, but it's Mo Wagner. Yeah, I think for Orlando, you could go with a couple guys, and I think it's pretty much their 2 centers that are better than Wendell Carter Jr. this year, which is kind of funny, and that is Goga Bitadze and, like Dylan said, Mo Wagner. Mo Wagner has been one of the best backup and I think now starting centers, at least in the Eastern Conference this year. He's averaging 13 points, 5 rebounds, shooting 56% from the field, and kind of shocking 36% from 3 on around 2.5 attempts a night. He just had a 32-point performance against the New York Knicks, and I think for the Orlando Magic team as a whole, I know it stinks they're without Paolo and Franz Wagner, but this is a nice test and just kind of experience in runtime for guys like Mo Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black to get way more shots than usual because their top 2 scoring options are currently sidelined. I think Mo Wagner is super underrated. I agree with Dylan with this Orlando Magic pick. X says here for the Dallas Mavericks, not enough people know about the impact of Najee Marshall. He's one of the most versatile players in the league and has helped my Mavs big time. He really was an amazing Derrick Jones Jr. replacement. I said it back when he signed with the Mavericks in the offseason. Najee Marshall was going to be one of the best value signings out of anybody that signed last offseason. This year, throughout 20 plus games, he's averaging 12 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists. He shot around 55% from the field, 31% from 3, 87% from the line. But Marshall is a great defender as well. He could switch onto multiple positions on the defensive end of the floor. And I felt like he really stepped up at times when Luka Doncic was sidelined for that couple game stretch earlier in the year. And I think it just provides positive value for Dallas on both ends of the floor. For somebody that's making less than the mid-level exception, like that was a steal of a pickup for Dallas. If there's somebody else I would go with, it's Quentin Grimes. I still have no idea why Detroit traded him away. I get they wanted to get a little bit older around Cade, but Quentin Grimes, I think, has been super underrated as well. And I also said in the beginning of the year that I feel like Najee Marshall and Quentin Grimes could replace Klay Thompson in that closing lineup. And then you could also give some love to PJ Washington and what he does defensively, because I think he's one of the more underrated defenders in the NBA as well. Aiden says for the Nets, it's Cam Johnson. He's a lights out shooter who has sneaky defensive abilities. And Cam Johnson has been great this year. I'm going to disagree with Aiden because I think Cam Johnson, if you would have said this earlier in the year or late last year, I would agree. But now he's one of the hottest names on the trade market, so I don't think that makes you underrated anymore. But Cam Johnson has been great this year. Throughout 25 games, 18.5 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. He's shooting 48% from the field, 43% from 3, and 87% from the line. He's going to make a contending team very happy this year, and I think he's going to net the Brooklyn Nets a great return at the trade deadline. And for the Nets, I don't think I would go with any of their top guys as underrated. Maybe Dennis Schroeder before he got moved. I don't think it's Claxton or Finney Smith or Cam Thomas. I'm just going to go with Jalen Wilson. I think he's one of the more underrated players. He was the 51st pick back in the 2023 draft out of Kansas, and I think he's a nice rotational piece for this team and deserves some more love. The year says here for the Denver Nuggets, it's Russell Westbrook. He has definitely embraced a bench role. Started with the Clippers, but I'm enjoying the way he fits the role for the Nuggets more as an extremely underrated defender, and he's still a great facilitator. Shot selection is also thankfully better. Yeah, I think for the Denver Nuggets, you could go with Russell Westbrook. You could talk about what Peyton Watson does for this team as well. Maybe Nikola Jokic deserves some more love nationally for what he does, but for Russ, he's definitely changed his style of play a little bit for Denver, which is a huge benefit for this team this season. Throughout 24 games, Russ is averaging 11 points, 4 rebounds, and 6.5 assists. You can maybe ask Nuggets fans who you like better at your point guard spot right now, Russ or Jamal Murray, and they may surprisingly say Russ more than you think. He's averaging 1.7 steals tonight, and it gives you 110% effort on every single play, no matter the score, which is just phenomenal to see for somebody that is 36 years old. He's in his 17th year in the league. So yeah, shout out to Russell Westbrook in Denver, because this is definitely one of the more exciting rush years we have seen in a little bit. BYT says here, for the Pacers, it's got to be Obi Toppin. A lot of people think he's just a dunk guy, but he has a very good three-point shot. Great play finisher, and this year he's actually been a solid defender, especially lately. He's also got more of an ability to put the ball on the floor this year. Yeah, and I think the Pacers have had their disappointments this season. You could talk about Halliburton's disappointments at times, same with maybe Siakam as a number one option or Miles Turner. And I think a lot of people are learning more about Benedict Mathurin, so I don't think he's really underrated anymore. So I would either go with TJ McConnell or I would actually go with Obi Toppin, because it was kind of shocking when they re-signed Obi Toppin in the offseason, and I still believe it does block a little bit of Jarris Walker as a development project for them, but I do think Obi Toppin has been underrated this season, because I think he did get overhated because of that contract re-signing in the offseason. This year, throughout 26 games, Obi's averaging around 10.5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists a night. He's shooting 55% from the field, 36% from 3, and Obi has been a positive 3-point shooter now in year 2 in Indiana, because he shot 40% from 3 last year. I do agree with BYT. I think his defense has been better this year, which is great to see, because I love me some Obi Toppin, and I loved him when he was on the Knicks. Jekko says here, for the Pelicans, it's Trey Murphy. Dude can sling it from 30 feet, and he can also make the dunk contest. I don't really think Trey Murphy is underrated anymore. I feel like throughout the NBA diehard community and the analytical community for the last couple of years, Trey Murphy was always their guy. He finally got that payday going into this year's season, and I don't think Trey Murphy is really underrated anymore. Now, he did start off the year hurt. Throughout 14 games, he's averaging 18 points, 4.5 rebounds, shooting 42% from the field and 32% from 3. He's playing for a bad team in a relatively smaller market in the NBA, so maybe you can say to the national audience, Trey Murphy is underrated, and I can't really disagree with you. And I would actually probably go Yves Missi, their rookie, as their most underrated player so far, but it's weird for the Pelicans because like CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson, they get a lot of slack on this team, which could inevitably just make them underrated in the NBA. So let me know, who would you say is the most underrated player on the Pelicans? Josh says here, for the Detroit Pistons, when Marcus Sasser comes in, he is not afraid to shoot. He helps with scoring when he goes in, but that's the thing, the Pistons need to play him more often. I agree with Josh. I think the Pistons definitely need to play Marcus Sasser more. I loved his rookie season. He was a little bit older coming out of Houston, so I expected him to be somewhat productive right away, but this year, he's 24 years old, throughout 18 games, averaging 16 points, 54% from the field, 41% from 3. He has yet to miss a free throw so far, but he's playing just around 14 minutes a night, which is down from 19 minutes a night last year. And maybe if they trade somebody like a Tim Hardaway Jr. or Malik Beasley, more minutes can open up for Marcus Sasser. But if they don't, I would like to see a team trade for Sasser, because I do think he's underrated. Do I think he's the most underrated Piston? I think that's up for debate, because Malik Beasley got a lot of hate in the offseason. And I said the Bucks were going to miss his presence, and a lot of Bucks fans on Twitter were saying that Gary Trent Jr. is a lot better. And I think Malik Beasley is showing why he ended up becoming underrated and undervalued in the offseason. He's shooting 41% from 3 this year throughout 27 games. RA says here, for the Toronto Raptors, it's Jakob Poeltl. Man's been balling hard with his smooth hooks, and he's a very solid center. I think because of the contract Poeltl got a couple off seasons ago, he did become a little bit overhated, and he is having a great year. 15.5 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists a night, shooting 59% from the field, and also averaging over a steal and block a game. I don't think the Raptors should actually trade him. I think they should maybe even look to re-sign him in this offseason, but I think a lot of people are learning that Jakob Poeltl is still a very productive center, and he's actually having the best year of his career. So you could go with Jakob, or some other guys I could give some love to is RJ Barrett, because I think he's having a phenomenal first full year here in Toronto. I think Jonathan Mogbo is a second-round pick, and I think Ochai Agbaji deserves some more love across the NBA National. Rob Cortez says, for the Houston Rockets, it's Jabari Smith. Dude contributes to winning and is on the right track. And I agree with his last statement. I think he's on the right track as well, because Jabari Smith Jr. was always going to be more of a project play coming out of Auburn. He was never going to be NBA ready in year 1 or year 2 from the expectations somebody was going to have with the 3rd overall pick. Now this year he got off to a rough start, and it was going to be tough for Jabari Smith to average career highs, at least in the scoring department, because there's a lot of mouths to feed in Houston. You got Şengün, you got Jalen Green, you got Fred VanVleet. There's some other young guys they've drafted high as well that want to get their shots. So this year, Jabari Smith got off to a tough start, at least shooting the ball, but I think he was always somewhat underrated as a defender. But over Jabari Smith's last 14 games, he's averaging around 13 points, but shooting 48% from the field, 44% from 3, and 85% from the line. I don't know if we're going to see the best version of Jabari Smith in Houston, because They could extend him this offseason. He could play under the last year of his team deal next year, or he could headline a deal in a bigger trade down the line. But I'm cool with saying Jabari Smith Jr. is the most underrated Rocket because I think Amen Thompson and Tari Eason get a ton of love. I would also maybe go Dillon Brooks. I think is underrated as well because a lot of people don't like Dillon Brooks for his time in Memphis, but I still think is one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. Lauren says here for the San Antonio Spurs, it's Julian Champagnie. With the minutes he's getting now, he's really shining, and if he continues to play like this, he has to be included in most improved player talks. I agree with Lauren. I think Champagnie is the most underrated Spur because everybody wants to talk about Wemby for obvious reasons, and I don't disagree. Stephon Castle is the new exciting young rookie. You also have wings like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson who are getting paid a decent amount of money, but it was not too long ago that Champagnie was a two-way player, and I think he's been a positive bench piece for the Spurs this year. He's still 23 years old. Throughout 26 games, he's averaging 13 points, 5 rebounds. He's shooting 43% from the field, but 35% from 3 on 7 attempts a night, which is kind of crazy. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton. He was claimed off waivers by the Spurs in February of 2023, and then he signed a multi-year contract with the Spurs the following offseason in July. He's getting paid $3 million this year, $3 million next year, and has a $3 million team option in 2027. If he continues to get better, this could turn into one of the best moves the Spurs have made under the radar. Next up, we have one about the Phoenix Suns, and this person thinks that it's Ryan Dunn. He's underrated as a three-point shooter, mid-range splasher, and a paint attacker. He is knocking down contested and open three-point shots. He was a steal of a deal in the draft, and I kind of disagree here. I think Ryan Dunn got off to a great start this season, but I always thought that three-point shooting stretch he had to start off his NBA career was a flash in the pan because we saw a large sample size at Virginia that he was not a great shooter. I saw him in person at the NBA Combine, and he did not shoot well there either. And I do think he's going to improve as a shooter over the course of his career. He's still just 21 years old, and I agree. He's one of the best defenders at his age. He was the best defender in the 2024 NBA draft, but I don't think he's the most underrated Sun. I would actually go with Royce O'Neal because I think he's been a great 3-and-D piece for them this year. K-Gill says for the OKC Thunder, it's Jalen Williams. He's an all-star, and he's better than Jaylen Brown. All right, I gotta disagree with this one. I love Jalen Williams. I've loved him since his rookie season, and I think he can deserve an all-star nod this year, and I'm not gonna disagree with that. Throughout 25 games, J-Dub is averaging 21.5 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. He's shooting 50% from the field, 38% from 3, 81% from the line. He's a good defender, and I think is one of the best secondary scoring options you can have in the NBA, and he's still just 23 years old. But I think saying he's better than Jaylen Brown, who was just the finals MVP, could make him not overrated a little bit, but definitely doesn't make him underrated. And I think a lot of people know about Jalen Williams and how good he is. I would actually go with a different Williams, Kenrich Williams. I think he's one of the more underrated defenders in the Western Conference as well. He would have been my pick. Nav says here for the Warriors, it is Kevon Looney. He's a key part of a dynasty and a crazy good rebounder. It is crazy that Kevon Looney is one of the more longer tenured players on a certain team in the NBA. He was drafted by the Warriors with the 30th pick back in 2015 after they won their first title with Curry, Clay, and Draymond. This year, throughout 23 games, 5 points, 7.5 rebounds, 2 assists a night. He's shooting 53% from the field, and I think at times could be the best big man on that roster, not named Draymond Green. So better than Trayce Jackson-Davis at times. And I'm perfectly fine with saying Kevon Looney is the most underrated Warrior this season. I think you can give more love to Moses Moody, which he kind of got to shot the ball a little bit more. Dustin says here for the Wizards, it's Jordan Poole. He really pulled it together in the last 2 months of last year, and this year is putting up really good numbers. Also, thank you for the love, Dustin. I really appreciate that. And I can agree that Jordan Poole has become underrated because obviously we know he's overpaid. That's objectively true. And he's gone to a smaller market in Washington, or at least a team that hasn't been good whatsoever. You could say they are the worst team in the NBA, and you're not wrong. But Jordan Poole has been a positive offensive player, like Dustin said, over the last 2 months of last year and into this year. He's still a good 3-point shooter, 39% from 3. He's a great free throw shooter, and I think he could be a fun offensive creator. Maybe not as your number 1, but as your number 2, 3, or 4. I don't know if we're ever going to see him leave Washington on this current contract just because he's getting paid so much money. And honestly, I don't disagree with Dustin. I think he is the most underrated player. Maybe you give some love to Malcolm Brogdon. And ABD says here for the Minnesota Timberwolves, he's not really that underrated anymore, but the best option has to be Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's having a really great season on both ends of the floor and plays intense every night and I agree. I actually think he's still the most underrated player on this team because everybody started to love Naz Reid last year. Maybe you could talk about Rudy Gobert just because he's definitely overhated in this league, so maybe that makes him underrated, but I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been better than Dante DiVincenzo and Jaden McDaniels this year. Walker, throughout 25 games, is averaging just under 10 points a night, 3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, shooting 49% from the field, 43% from 3 on about 4 attempts a night, and about a steal a night as well. And maybe doesn't get a ton of steals, but I feel like he's active in the passing lanes a ton every single night for Minnesota, and I think is one of the more underrated players in the Western Conference. He's making $4 million this year and is a free agent in the offseason. He may go for a pretty penny. And that's gonna be for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate you dropping a thumbs up. Make sure you are subscribed for NBA content all year long, and you can put notifications on as well to get alerted when I come out with a video or maybe a community post when you guys can be featured in the next one of these. And if you agreed or disagreed with any of these underrated players, please let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.